session of kind of discussion format with Sayyid Sulayman. Tonight's topic is Imam Mahdi, and inshallah, I'll try to ask questions that hopefully are your questions on this topic from Sayyid, and later in the conversation, we will also allow you to contribute and raise your hand and ask questions. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand, and earliest time possible, I will ask you to, ask a question. So without further ado, I ask Sayyid Sulayman to join me and let us start. Alright. So this is a sensitive topic in a way because, of course, mainstream Shia believes Imam Mahdi is the Imam of the time, and there's so much emphasis in Shia about Imamate, and he's the Imam of the time. So he's such a highly important figure, really, such a central figure in our faith. At the same time, I would think most of the people in this room, if not all of them, have a faith to Imam Mahdi through ulama. So it's not a direct experience that I've ever had to meet Imam Mahdi or have any other basis for having that faith. And when you look at the history, what has happened is basically, of course, Imam Mahdi is known to be the last Imam. There are some stories about the life of Imam Hussein or the Prophet or Imam Ali that even though they were in some times that the situation was, there was so much oppression or situation that the new information was not easily available for the public, but we had following Imams. We had Imam we had Imam Ja'far Sadiq, we had Imam Muhammad Baqir, we had following Imams who later on basically confirmed that yes, this is a true news, this is an acceptable information. But we don't have that about Imam Mahdi. Imam Mahdi was the last Imam, and whatever information comes after his time is basically through non-Ma'soom, through non-Imams, through basically 100% reliable sources. And on top of that, we know that, even like it is said during the time of Imam Reza, some people were making the assumption that maybe he is the Imam Mahdi. Or even there were some questions about, whether the brother of Imam Hassan Askari is the Imam Mahdi, or some other people later, after Imam Reza, before Imam Mahdi, were possibly considered by people as being Imam Mahdi. So even for the Shias of that time, it was not such a obvious, clearly known, basically piece of information about that. Okay, there's going to be a son of Imam Hassan Askari who is going to be the 12th Imam, and then he's going to have a long-lasting life. So, long story short, what is the proof for people to have faith for such a central figure? And of course, it is possible. Is it possible for someone who have a life of more than 1,000 years? Yes, it is possible. But given the combination of all these basically aspects of this question, what is the basis for us to believe that there has been a son for Imam Hassan Askari in his time and his life, and he is the central figure of our faith at the time?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So that's a very detailed topic. It's not just a question that we can answer briefly, but I will start an answer and not give a comprehensive answer, otherwise it'll be perhaps kind of long and more of a lecture. One point to keep in mind, though, is that when you're talking about any issue related to imamate, or more generally any related issue to theology, it's important to keep in mind what level of proof we're looking for. So generally speaking, things that are in accordance with what we expect and what we are used to, they take a lower burden of proof than something that is unexpected. Right? If I were to tell you right now that drive safely, there's extra police enforcement out on the streets, and they're giving tickets to people, you probably won't ask me for evidence, and you won't immediately go on Google and try to find an article. You probably consider it credible, if I'm a credible source. But if I were to tell you that they've declared martial law, and all of a sudden the Constitution is suspended and there's soldiers on the street, even if I'm a credible person, you might not believe me. Not because you consider me to be a liar, but I might have been misled, or there might be something that is going on. Right. So the evidence for the 12th Imam will either require a kind of out-of-way proof, or it'll be a straightforward proof depending on what is credible for us. To give another example of that, there was a time when people, even scientists, believed in something called spontaneous generation. And so they would say that if you have food that is rotting, maggots will spontaneously generate within that food. Today we don't believe that. And so if somebody were to try to argue that there was spontaneous generation of life, we would require extraordinary proof, because we don't consider that to be a likely explanation. But when that theory was current, people might just take a simple observation and say that there it is, there's a spontaneous generation. So this is something which, in the history of science and the history of human thought, is an important variable. When it comes to the 12th Imam, before we ask what is the proof, what kind of proof are we looking for? Is it something that is extraordinary, and therefore we need a high burden of proof? Or is it something that is straightforward, and the reports by some of the companions of Imam Hassan Askari alayhi salam, for example, should be sufficient? What the traditional Shi'i position has been is that the confusion that came about is not because the belief in the Imam did not have evidence. The confusion was largely because the circumstances of the Imam's imamate were unprecedented. Repression from the government, a period of a hidden childhood and concealed imamate with very few witnesses. And so that was kind of unprecedented. People were forbidden from naming the imam in order to prevent the news from spreading. So for these reasons, those circumstances made it difficult for people to fathom, to understand that Imam Hassan Askari did have a son and he was the imam. But if we look at it from the perspective of a believing Shia, right? A Shi'i Muslim who believes up until the 11 Imams. Right? If you don't believe up until the 11 Imams, then the solution is not to go and find out the evidence for the existence of the 12th Imam. The solution is to say, why was Imam Hassan Askari an Imam? Why was Imam Ali Naqi an Imam? And so on. For a person who's gone that far, I would argue, and the traditional Shia argument is, the burden of proof is not that high. We have already had established up until the time of Imam Hassan Askari that imamate is to continue. That whenever one imam passes, he passes on, when he passes to the next world, he passes on the imamate and his role of divine guidance to his successor. That the earth will not be without an imam. So because that is the belief system and the practice that Imami Shi'i Islam had developed and believed in up until the time of Imam Hassan Askari, if the next Imam is difficult for us to determine, that doesn't mean that we're going to think, well, maybe there isn't an Imam. It simply means that we have to make more evidence and sift through the different claims to find out who the Imam is. So to summarize, the answer, in my view, is not to look at the evidence and say, is the evidence strong or not? The evidence will be strong or not strong depending on what prior beliefs we have. If I believe that it's far-fetched for a person to live for 1,000 years, then I will be predisposed to reject a belief in an Imam who has lived for more than 1,000 years. If I don't consider that to be far-fetched, I will not be predisposed to reject it. If I believe, as Imami Shi'i Muslims do believe, that and they did believe with many ahadith and evidence up until the time of Imam Hassan Askari, that the imamate is a continuing legacy, that every imam does introduce the next imam, that no imam dies unplanned or unexpected or without being able to pass on the imamate. Then the idea that Imam Hassan Askari would have a successor and that his closest and most trusted followers would be the people who would inform others of who that successor is not far-fetched. And it would be something that would be straightforward for a person to accept.
But again, I mean, this is going to be highly dependent on trusting
Yes,
that the scholarship is really, because
not just scholarship, because many of the people who are making these reports were not scholars; they were family members. But the point is,
no, they were family members. But I'm just there are two issues here. Number one, we never had the opportunity to meet Imam Hassan Askari, right?
True.
So we have to rely on people like you or the people who have
I didn't meet Imam
gone,
Hassan.
yeah. So who have gone through the history, have reviewed all the documents, and truly, believe that there is like 99% or even more than that confidence, because the position that we're giving to Imam Mahdi is not a simple position. We're giving him the authority, the very central figure, right, in our faith. That's number one.
It's no more central. It's no more central than the authority that we're giving to Imam Muhammad Taqi.
Right, but
or Imam Ali Naqi.
Yeah, but the complexity is that, as you just brought up, the circumstances of the time of Imam Hassan Askari were such that
there was less.
It is acceptable.
Evidence.
It does make sense to someone to say that maybe the news was not spread, accurately. Maybe it was a situation,
Certainly.
maybe it was a time.
Certainly.
So
However,
that does make sense, right? So then having that confidence.
Well, on some level it makes sense. On another level it doesn't. So if it makes sense, right, what you're actually saying is that Shia Islam up until that point was wrong. In other words, the only reason why it would make sense for us to say that these claims about the succession to Imam Hassan Askari might not be accurate,
right,
is for us to say that the imamate of Imam Hassan Askari was also built upon wrong foundations. So there's very little way for us to question Imam Mahdi and maintain the belief in the Imams until then.
So you're saying that there was no division
No.
at the time after Imam Hassan Askari
Basically.
about Imam Zaman.
What I'm
At
saying
least
is-
within Shias, there was no division. It was just a single
What I'm-
opinion among
Yes.
Shias.
There was an initial period of doubt and confusion, and that happened for many imams. Right after Imam Ja'far Sadiq died, the majority of the Shia did not follow Imam Musa Kazim. The majority of the Shia followed initially Abdullah, the son of Imam Ja'far Sadiq, Abdullah al-Afta. Right, and even the majority of the fuqaha and senior companions, they were confused. It took about 2 years, or maybe a little bit more than that, for the majority of people to accept Imam Musa Kazim.
Right.
The Fatahi school did survive, but it became a very minor school. So after Imam Ja'far Sadiq, over time, the evidence became clear for the majority of people that Imam Musa Kazim is the correct Imam. After Imam Musa Kazim, there was another split, and not a majority this time, but a number of people did follow the belief that he was the last Imam, and they were known as the Waqifiyya. Right? But over time, the vast majority of Shia accepted Imam Ali Rida alayhi salam as the correct Imam. So there was a division or a period of confusion, a hayra, that took place after many of the Imams. But the question for us is, do we understand why there was a consensus or a consolidation for the next Imam? If we understand why there was a consensus for Imam Musa Kazim and Imam Ali Rida, what we'll notice is that the type of confusion that existed after Imam Ja'far Sadiq and after Imam Musa Kazim and even after Imam Rida did not exist after the later Imams. From the period of Imam Rida alayhi salam, it actually began to kind of become much easier. Although Imam Rida had only one son. The son was born when he was an old man in his 40s probably. And the physical features of Imam Jawad were such that some people suspected that the Imam is just claiming to be his son, God forbid. And he was also a minor child, less than 10 years of age. And yet we find that the Shia were able to maintain a consensus that he is the Imam. There's no other claimant who was able to make a claim. To my mind, to understand the 12th Imam, the key point in history to kind of be able to understand that is the succession to Imam Rida. Because imagine today, right? Let's say that, God forbid, in Iran there is a political vacuum and there is a new leader that needs to be chosen. How likely is it that with senior scholars, ulama, maraji, you would have an 8-year-old child be a consensus figure? Now, imamate is a different concept, so it's not the same thing. But it kind of gives you a sense of how unlikely it is, right? Today, let's say that you have somebody in his 20s, right, adult, but without that pedigree, no degrees, no teaching history, no publications, to be given a massive position of authority. If it happens because there's politicking, then you might say that, well, sometimes, that takes place. But what we find with Imam Jawad, Imam Muhammad Taqi, is that he was 8 years old. And Imam Ali Rida alayhi salam had a large number of brothers because Imam Musa Kazim had many sons. And he also had his uncles, some of the sons of Imam Ja'far Sadiq were still alive. And he was a child. And the Shia, by consensus, accepted him as the Imam. That tells us several things. Number one, that by that time, Shia Islam had acquired an identity that would allow them to be able to measure the truth or the falsehood of claimants to imamate. And number two, that they understood that imamate was not guided by normal kind of human learning and education. Right? That's why an 8-year-old was considered to be the right claimant. Among the followers, you had fuqaha, you had teachers, you had people who were like our maraji today. Now, if we doubt Imam Hassan Askari's succession, in effect, we can't just do that in a vacuum. We have to go back and say that means that Imam Jawad must not have been the right Imam either.
But there was question that uncle of Imam Zaman is said to have that claim, right?
Ja'far al-Tawab, yes.
Yes, so there was a claim even at the time of Imam
But that's the point. That all of those claims, if we look at how they went in history,
right.
Who believed those claims?
Right.
Which of the, and this is why it's important to go back to Imam Jawad's time, right? How did Imam Jawad's imamate become accepted? The procedure that was established from that time, even earlier, but this is kind of an inflection point. The procedure that was established at that time is that you go to those who are known for their piety and for their knowledge within the Shia world and their connection with the Imam.
Right.
And you see that, do they have a clear sense that one claimant is right? Sometimes they didn't. And then people would have to wait. So after Imam Ja'far Sadiq's time, like I said, for several months and years,
right.
there was a waiting period. Even the fuqaha said, you know what, it hasn't become clear for us.
Right.
And that's why Abdullah al-Afqah, he only survived for 40 days, but then there was a period, even after he died, where there was confusion. Until Imam Musa Kazim alayhi salam was able, through his own knowledge, through his own argumentation,
right.
to demonstrate his imamate. So initially there was that confusion. But what happened is that a procedure was developed under the guidance of the imams, by which those closest to the previous imam, and who were trusted for their knowledge and trusted for their piety, they would be referred to see what was the guidance of the imam. But there was an underlying understanding that there is another imam.
Right.
So if the idea that there must be an imam was not solidly understood, Imam Jawad would not have a whole lot of claim. People could have said that, Imam Rida was the Mahdi.
Right.
That's it, it's come to an end. He doesn't have a son who's old enough.
Right.
They could have said maybe Imam Jawad will become the Imam when he's older, but he's not ready yet. They could have said a brother or an uncle of Imam Rida is the Imam. All of those opinions that I just mentioned were put forward. They were all rejected because, and this is where we get now a sense of the theology that existed. Through these historical reports, it was so obvious and clear to the Shia in a way, had it been clear 100 years earlier, had it been clear 50 years earlier, that the imamate is a continuous line. So if we accept that and we understand that, then we're already coming into the ghaiba with a certain theology and a certain belief, right? It's kind of like, I'm not a common person analyzing a scientific experiment. I'm a scientist. I already know the previous studies in this field. I can kind of gauge whether this particular experiment was done well and is credible, or was done poorly and is incredible, is not credible. When it comes to the 12th Imam, those foundations were relevant.
Right.
Now, if you just look at the 12th Imam, yes, there are holes in the history, because it's a few reports. They're reports by people who have a vested interest, their family members, or their close companions of Imam Hassan Askari. So there is a way to say that, well, that would not stand up in a court of law. It wouldn't stand up in a court of law if the court of law is operating according to the assumption that there is no imam, that there is no shared theology that binds the Shia together.
Right.
But if you're coming with that belief system, then those pieces of evidence are operative. And it's not that you have to refer to scholars in my generation or one generation ago, right? We have Sheikh Kulayni, who lived during that time. We have the father of Sheikh Saduq, Ali ibn Hussein in Babway. We have the teacher of Sheikh Mufid, Ja'far ibn Muhammad ibn Khulaway. We have many figures who are well known. They're sometimes known to the Sunni world and to the Shia world. And in some cases, they're known in the Shia world as well-known scholars. And they were contemporaries. And they didn't have any doubt that these claims of the succession of Imam Hassan Askari are true. So that kind of gives us a sense that for people who believe in Shi'ism, it was really not that difficult to reach consensus.
Right.
Yes, historically, if you ignore the theology, it is something that was difficult to reach consensus. That's the distinction I hope I've been able to
I
convey.
understand, yeah. Is there a question? Yes, please.
Sayyid, when we were younger, we heard that the Prophet had given all the names of the 12 Imams. Is that
Yeah, when you were younger, you heard that the Prophet had given all the name of all the 12 Imams. Luckily, you're not that young anymore. The Prophet had most certainly, most probably done that. But what we can say historically is that regardless of whether the Prophet did that or did not do that, clearly those ahadith were not circulating widely. Because if the ahadith had been circulating widely, there wouldn't have been a question as to whether Imam Zain al-Abidin is the Imam or Muhammad ibn Hanafiya is the Imam. Is Imam Musa Kadhim the Imam or is his brother Abdullah Imam? And these are people who had these questions, who were scholars, who were sincere people. Now some people come and they say that, well, the very historical debate proves that the hadith that you're talking about, where the Prophet named the 12 Imams, are false. That's not true. Right? The fact that we had the debate does not mean that the ahadith were false. It means that the ahadith were not widely circulating. Either they existed and they were not widely circulating, right? Or they may have been widely circulating, but there were a whole bunch of other conflicting ahadith that were also false but circulating. And so it's kind of like Nostradamus' prophecies, if you can kind of make the comparison. There might be prophecies that fit one and the opposite, and a third and a fourth course of action. So you don't know, you still have debate. It doesn't mean that the one prophecy is false. So in other words, there was a complex situation that was going on. You and I at today's time, we can't say for sure which ahadith were or were not circulating. What we can say for sure is that those ahadith were not the basis by which people understood who the Imam was. They had another basis. That's not to say,
that's a good thing.
Which is a good thing. Which does not mean that those ahadith were all false. Which does not mean that they were not circulating at all. But it means that they were not the basis.
We can accept one more question and then need to move on. Ali?
So, sorry, could you repeat the question yourself?
Yes.
So, because Brother Mustafa mentioned, I'm going to ask it right now. Regarding this hadith, I think there are two shubha that if you answer them, I would really appreciate. First shubha is that the story of these 12 caliphs was first used by Umayyads when they were weak. So there was this hadith during the, like at the end of the Umayyad period.
You know, the discussion about that particular hadith is not totally relevant to tonight's topic. So let's,
Okay.
yeah, for the interest of time. I know it's a good question, but I think it's not, definitely, because even Sayyid is not totally relying on that hadith on that topic, right?
I'm not relying on it. I can just briefly say that no, the hadith, we can't say that it was first circulating in Umayyad times. The hadith of the 12 imams, or 12 amirs, is a hadith that is not necessarily directly related to the Mahdi or the imamate, but it was widely circulating in general Islamic sources. Maybe we'll have to leave that for discussion of imamate more so than a discussion of
Yeah, inshallah. I will ask
Mahdiyya.
All right, so let's say, I know right now, we have mainstream Shia believing in Imam Mahdi, and, there is, we can say there is consensus, even though there might be some limited number of, very progressive or, let's say liberal scholars who do not confirm their faith and, the confidence about that there was a Imam Mahdi, but mostly, if not all the scholars, believe in that as a very solid part of the faith. My question is, how does that matter? So basically, yes, let's say we do believe in Imam Mahdi as being a figure. We've heard like Wilayat Amir al-Mu'mineen is a very critical, part of our faith. There is
So why does it
enough
matter?
historical evidence about,
Yeah, why does it matter? It
Right.
matters, the belief in the 12th Imam matters because that's part of God's practice in His Sunnah throughout human history. That guidance and even misguidance, أَإِمَّا يَهْدُونَ إِلَى النَّارِ exist, right? That misguidance is also through people, and guidance is through people.
Right.
So that is part of our understanding of how salvation and how the risk of going to hell both operate. And for us as Shia Muslims, we believe that salvation comes from purification and from authentic knowledge. That is going to be conveyed to us. The path of purification, the path of getting authentic knowledge of what is the rightful life,
Right.
comes from people. So the importance of the 12th Imam is to recognize that God has given that resource to us. And if we don't have access to it, it's because of our weakness or our deficiency,
Right.
not because God has put Islam on hold.
Well, that's true, but my question is, okay, what happens if someone does believe in Imam Ali, does like him, love him, sees him as a central figure in Islam, but then does not have that confidence about his faith about Imam Mahdi? Do we believe this person is going to hell? Do we believe
We
this
don't believe
person?
he's going to hell, we just believe he's not a Shia.
Okay.
He's not an Imami Shia. So
Okay.
in other words, if a person says that, Imam Jafar Sadiq has a lot of hadith, I'll believe in him, but I don't believe in Imam, say one of the Imams. I won't mention one Imam to give an
Right.
example, but let's say one of the Imams who doesn't have a lot of hadith. Now, in a practical sense, does that mean his prayer is going to be different? Does that mean that his fasting is going to be different? Does that mean he could still kind of live in the Shia world? And if somebody
So what is he missing? Is he missing a label? What is it that he's
no,
missing?
what he's missing is that the Imams have said that whoever denies one of us denies all of us. It is your duty to know that these 12 Imams have been appointed by God to be your leaders. Now, if there is a scholar who does research and says that I'm not convinced Imam Hussein was an Imam, I'm not convinced that Imam Zayd al-Abidin was an Imam,
Right.
we don't say he's going to hell.
Right.
We don't say that all of a sudden his ability to pray, his ability to fast is going to be compromised. If we keep Imam Hussein and we drop some of the other Imams, you might even be able to work within a Shia society and not be calm, right? But the importance of Imamate to the Shia identity is not a matter of what teaching you get from this Imam.
Right.
It's a matter of the Imams having said that to know all and to recognize all
Right.
is part of what makes you a believer.
Right.
Just like saying that if I deny Jibreel, or if I deny Mikael, or if I deny Prophet Yunus, what's the big deal?
But then it's, the Quran is usually very solid reference. You know,
But why does
all of
the
these
Quran-
questions come into the.
No, but why does the Quran say that? The Quran says that because it's not that we get something from Prophet Yunus, right? That if we deny Prophet Yunus, we forget how to pray, or if we deny Prophet Zakaria, all of a sudden we don't get to do Hajj. Right? The reason why the Quran says La nufarriqu bayna ahadin minhum is because this is the path that God has defined. These are the figures, the role models, the signposts of that path. And so it's a whole. When you take out a piece of that whole, then the whole is compromised.
Okay.
So similarly, the 12 Imams. The 12 Imams, right? The first Imam is not Quranic. For us to say that any one of the Imams is to be Quranic. Quranic in the sense of the name being mentioned.
That's true.
Right? Therefore, the whole concept of Imamate is Quranic.
Right.
And the identity of who the Imams are is super Quranic, we can say.
Yes.
It comes after the Quran. But it is that collective that has been given to us as a means of guidance.
Right.
To reject any means of that collective takes you outside of the parameters of 12 Rashiism.
Right. Okay. So, well, you know, I would think most people in this room do believe in Imam Mahdi. And this is not usually a big challenge given the consensus that we have in our ulama. But, you know, then this is the main question is, okay, so what? You know, because, you know, yes, you do believe in Imam Mahdi, but, you know, he's invisible or he's not available.
He's
or there's
unrecognizable.
Right. However, whatever it is, I'm not, you know, so you could use any term you want to use, but he's not accessible to the public. And not even publicly known scholars, so there's not even any scholar that publicly claims that he's directly, in a two-way relationship with Imam, such that he can communicate and he can receive orders and he can receive basically guidance in a way that is confirmed by Imam. So question is, okay, what are we, what is that next step? So let's say we do believe in Imam Zaman, Imam Mahdi. So what is the next step that should come after? Is it just to keep him in mind? So try to be a good Muslim, try to live your life, the life of a
That's
Muslim.
a big part of it, yeah.
And then keep in mind that if he does, appear in some point, we're obligated to follow him. But as long as he's not appeared, just try to live a Muslim life, and you're doing.
No, I think the biggest part is to recognize that Islam is a religion that was completed because it's ready to be implemented. In other words, from God's end, He has not just given us the teachings, which is the Quran, but He's readied it to be practically implemented.
Okay.
Right. So the leader, the guide, the implementer is ready and waiting. That recognition means that we're not thinking of the Day of Judgment or the promise of a divine Savior as just a concept which will come in the future.
Right.
We think of it as something that is there and waiting for us, that is governing the affairs of the world that we have to connect to. So it brings immediacy, right? It brings a sense of obligation, and it makes that belief real for our lives, right? That we actually wake up and long to have some connection to our Imam.
So
that's one thing. But one more thing.
Okay, this is a kind of the same question. So I want to know, what is the ideal state of a relationship between a Shia and Imam Mahdi at this time? What is that? What is the best state of a relationship that one may have with Imam Mahdi at this time? That's part of that.
All right, so this will tie into the second thing I was going to say.
Okay.
So one thing is that we believe that it's alive. Those who know me well know it's a standard technique that I use, but it actually does tie in. So the first thing was that it makes it something that is real and that I can long to. The second benefit of believing in an actual Imam who is alive is that it makes us receptive to guidance. Right? Guidance comes from God through different means. Whether we can receive it as guidance or not depends on what we think is credible. So to give you an example, right? For the traditional Shia, right? And I've actually had this experience to me as well. If you come in with a turban, with an abba, with a kaba, dressed properly, trim beard, and somebody says, "How much is zakatul fitra?" Right? You say $10. You say, "All right, good, thank you." And then the same person, right, happens not to have yet put on their full regalia. and somebody comes and says, Zakat al-Fitr, how much is it? You say $10. You say, no, I'm not really sure. Can you ask an alim? Right? Now, whether you're receptive or not receptive to something depends, gives a indication of how much or how little benefit you'll get.
Right.
So believing in the 12th Imam, right, that there is a person who is in charge of dispensing divine guidance, means that in our prayer, in our life, right, we have dreams, we have advice given to us by scholars, we have advice given to us by pious people in our lives, we have our own experiences, mistakes we make, things that we think about, contemplate. All of those are different means that God is trying to give us a spiritual wake-up call. Whether we think of them as a bunch of coincidences, or as a series of incidents that can lead to guidance, or maybe in superstitious terms, right? That depends on our state of mind. Some people are superstitious, they take things that should guide them and they turn it into magic. Some people are skeptical, they take things that should guide them and they consider them coincidences and forget about them. Right? So believing in the 12th Imam makes us receptive to the messages that come through the Imam from God. So that's how the relationship should be. That what we think of ourselves as being is awaiting a guidance from God as to how we can fulfill a better role to fulfill the purposes that God has put us on earth for. So our relationship to the Imam,
So is it being receptive to different ways of guidance?
receptive to different ways of guidance, open-minded, humble, ready to step forward, right? Not become cynical, right? Not become alienated from community, from others, because of bad experiences. Because in the end, we realize that these experiences are a way that God is training us to be able to sacrifice and serve a greater cause.
Right.
So that receptivity is something that it comes from recognizing that there is somebody who is present and guiding.
But there are a couple of challenges here. See, number one,
There's many challenges.
I mean, yeah, but a couple of key challenges. Number one is that you see in practice, even between some high-level scholars, there are differences of opinion. Sometimes significant differences of opinion. Okay, so if you feel like as a Shia you're going to be open-minded and receiving, then you say, okay, these are our greatest figures, and still they're not able to
That's
agree on same some
very
very
true.
key
Which is where you step
issues.
back. Which is where you step back.
Right. So then the question is, okay, so if there is a guidance from Imam, why is it that you see those differences?
Maybe the
between
guidance
such high
is to have
level-
differences.
What?
Maybe the guidance is to have differences. There's a story told that back in the day when there was telegrams, there was a young reporter whose editor had sent them to do a story. And the editor wanted to kind of train that reporter to make independent judgments. And the reporter would always try to get specific guidance, like, do I do this, do I not do that? And so there was a major breaking story. The reporter said, should I do this or not? And the editor was frustrated. He said, just telegram back, yes. And so the reporter then sent a telegram back that, do you mean yes, I should do it, or yes, I should not? And he said, no. Sometimes the point is not to
Someone
give...
is not frustrated.
He might be frustrated. Sometimes the whole method of guidance is to have differences of opinion, so that you have to try different things. You have to kind of learn
But
that
then-
we have to stand on our own feet.
But then there is
Every
news that-
trainer, every editor,
Okay.
every teacher, every trainer, every mentor sets up their trainees to sometimes be lost,
Okay.
to sometimes make mistakes,
Right.
even to fail, in order to be able to develop certain competence.
Okay.
So the fact that the
what you're
difference
saying
does not mean there's no guidance. That might be the
is
guidance.
the sincerity and the struggling is more important than being exactly on the right path? Is that
I
what
do
you're
think so,
saying?
yes. That the akhlaqi element is more important than actually being right. Because in the end, how do we know we're right?
Right.
We follow our obligation
Yeah.
to the best of our ability. But the idea that I'm going to solve everything, and in fact, when we sometimes have a eureka moment where we think we've solved everything, that might mean that we've kind of departed from from what we really are capable of.
Yeah, I said there are a couple of challenges. The second one is that we have news that when Imam Zaman appears, he's going to reject a lot of the things that are actually
Yes.
accepted under the name of Islam. So there is this fear that how do I know what I'm following now?
You
is
don't have to worry
not
about it,
among
because
those-
that's not your job. It's the Imam's job. It's always God's job. It's always God's job to explain a new hujjah. We follow the hujjah, whatever authority God has given to us. If God comes tomorrow and says, I'm changing the rule, let me just kind of give you a rough example. Should a Christian at the time, at the eve of the prophethood, should a Christian have known that something's not right? We've lost part of the guidance? Yes, right? Because the theology that was being taught by the church, the practices, much of the Sharia of Musa and the practices of Isa had been lost.
Right.
So a good Christian should have said, something's not right. We're missing some guidance. Does that mean that they should have been rejected? No, right? They say that I'm going to follow, right, the millat of Ibrahim as a Hanif. I'll follow what I know until God sends a hujjah. So that's basically what we have to do today. Much of the things in our religion might have to be retaught to us by the Imam because we misunderstood them, or there might need to be further guidance provided. But we follow the hujjah that has come to us, and then when God sends the information, it's His job.
Right.
We'll change.
Okay. There's a question, right? Yes, please.
He is trying to say that it is not that much of proof as it is the belief. If you look at Quran, for example, you have الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. It is not just, it is iman, not istidlal. Okay? Or the other place that Quran says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَسْتَحِي أَنْ يَضْرِبَ مَثَلًا مَا بَعُوضَةً فَمَا فَوْقَهَا فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فَيَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَيَقُولُونَ مَاذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ, and so on. Right? You are, I think, trying to say that most of thing here is the most important thing is belief. You believe that this is the tradition. You believe that this is the way that the madhab was established and went on, and with that belief, we go ahead and we correct. Is that
Is that correct? So the question is there a difference between iman or belief and kind of argumentation or istidlal? Iman is something that is more comprehensive than just an intellectual exercise. Istidlal has a part, right? And Burhan has a part in developing our iman. So proof, argumentation, contemplation, right? All of them, they have a part. But in the end, iman is a decision. Iman is a commitment. Iman is a covenant. It's not passive, it's active. You study, you contemplate, you do engage in istidlal and reasoning, but in the end you decide, I'm going to commit or I'm not going to commit. Right? So it's aqdun bil qalb, to tie a knot with your heart and say, yes, I'm going to follow this. So it's it does have a place for argumentation and reasoning. But you're right, it's much more comprehensive than that. And once you have a commitment in your heart, then it shows up, right? وَإِقْرَارٌ بِاللِّسَانِ, then you affirm it with your tongue after you've made a commitment. وَعَمَلٌ بِالْجَوَارِحِ, and then you do it with your limbs. So it's commitment, speaking, and then practice.
Any questions from sister's side? No questions? Okay, I guess we're running out of time. So is there any last thing you want to close on the topic of Imam Mahdi, and basically anything that could help us, be in a better relationship versus him?
Sure.
Right, and there is a question that I think, well, I was asked you to ask that question to bring up too, that how that relationship is a two-way relationship, and how can that two-way relationship be stronger?
I think the most important thing is the more we contemplate the manner of vulnerability we have, the better we'll be able to appreciate a need for divine guidance. And then God decides for us and tells us how He provides that guidance. It's through human beings, right? Even the 12th Imam, because he is in Ghaiba, his guidance will come, right, through people. So if I pray to God to help me pay a debt, it might be a friend or an acquaintance who gives me advice or brings me a loan or does something for me when I ask them or even without my asking them. So it's through people that God, and it's through people that the Imam provides help and provides guidance. When I contemplate my vulnerability, then I put myself in the best place of seeing that I need guidance and appreciating where it's coming from. The problem comes, you have maybe a person with a mental instability. If they know that they have a problem, they'll go and seek therapy, they'll go and seek counseling, they'll go and seek maybe psychiatric treatment. But if they're in denial and they think they're perfectly sane, then it might be a simple problem that can be solved through therapy or a problem that can be solved through drugs, but they won't even seek out that treatment, they won't accept the treatment. Right? So for us, not just in a mental sense, but in a spiritual sense, we have to kind of be aware of what are our weaknesses and what are our vulnerabilities. And so some of the best things that we can do, for example, are the du'as, like dua Arafah of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, dua Abi Hamza Famali of Imam Zayd al-Abidin, these types of du'as that really discuss for every human being, why do we have feelings of emptiness? Why do we have inadequacy in our spirituality? This builds the groundwork for us then to actually try to bridge that gap through, say, dua al-nudba, through dua al-ahad. Those du'as come after we feel a need, we feel an emptiness. It shouldn't just be a political emptiness, that I want to destroy my enemies, therefore I need an imam to be my military commander. But it should be a spiritual vulnerability and need. And if we have that, then we will feel a need to connect to the imam, and then when the imam provides guidance through those direct or indirect means, and mostly it'll be indirect perhaps, we'll be receptive and able to benefit from it.
Right. I guess there are more questions to ask, but for the interest of time, I guess we need to end the session. So thank you very much, and if maybe you do some prayers at the end of the session, and inshallah we'll close the.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Subhana man la ya'tadi ala ahli mamlakatin, subhana man la ya'khudhu ahli al-ardi bi arwan al-a'nab. اللهم اجعل لي في قلبي نورا وبصرا وفهما وعلما انك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى ال محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Inshallah, we'll continue these conversations in the following nights, and we appreciate any feedback, comments. You can just directly talk to myself or the organizers, or you can post comments on Facebook page. Inshallah, we try to improve every day for the parents. So.